Hello, I'm Grant Smith, Independent Parliamentary Candidate for Maidenhead, and I'd like to talk to you for a little bit about the National Health Service. Now, we're told the National Health Service is in crisis. We've been told the National Health Service is in crisis for at least all my adult life. But I happen to agree, I believe it is. But I'm not talking about the sort of short-term crisis due to Tory austerity. I'm talking about a more profound structural crisis. Medical science has increased immeasurably over the last few years. There's more drugs available, there's more cancers are curable. As a consequence of this and post-war demographics, we're an ageing society, and we started maybe giving mental health some of the attention it deserves. This means that this sort of compound of need, expectation and capability is rising sharply and accelerating upwards. Meanwhile, we look at how our governments have gone about funding healthcare. Now, the Tories' sort of general view is to maintain approximate real-term neutrality or a slight increase, and assume there's a kind of perpetual cycle of efficiency increases to make up the rest. Labour Party, on the other hand, their view is they will promise always slightly more than the Conservatives, but never be entirely sure how they're going to fund it. Neither of these alternatives remotely addresses the fundamental problem. So we have the situation that we have our need and expectation rising sharply like this and accelerating away, whilst our funding carries on with a slight incline. And you've got the two lines growing further and further apart. Forgive me, I'm an engineer, I sort of think like this. Which means at some point we're going to have a bust. Either the system breaks down, or we're faced with a situation where we have to have a profound rethink about how we look at healthcare. Now, this could lead to a number of outcomes. Firstly, more and more of us could end up paying more and more for private healthcare, and the National Health Service ends up as a kind of a safety net. To the opposite extreme, we could have a root and branch consideration of how we're prepared to be taxed. And I'm not talking about adding, a point or two to the upper rate of income tax. We're talking about a profound consideration of how we go about taxation, almost to the point that sustaining the health service becomes one of the major functions of our economy. The third option, which is probably the most difficult of them all, is we have a frank conversation with ourselves as a country about whether we're prepared to limit our expectation from the National Health Service. Now, all three of these, and any other alternatives I can think of, are pretty unpalatable in very different ways. And our politicians don't like giving you a choice of unpalatable options, which means I don't think we've ever got round to having the conversation we need to have about the direction that the health service is going to take. And if we don't have this, conversation, if we don't make these decisions, the system's going to break. Those two lines are going to get so far apart that the health service is going to fail, and one of those alternatives is going to happen by default. This is far too important to be left to chance. We need our politicians to show some real courage in addressing these issues. We also need them to show some trust in the public that we are capable of dealing with these difficult concepts. Because if we carry on ignoring this structural problem, eventually there's going to be a bust, and we're either going to be picking up the pieces or left with an outcome that none of us planned and none of us wanted.